Howdy y'all, welcome back. Today we're going to be looking at the Tartarian peace, also known as the Pax Tartarica. Now, we'll begin by letting you know that the Tartarian Empire, also known commonly today as the Mongol Empire, practiced Christianity from as early as the 7th century. The Church of the East was known as Nestorian. Many Tartarian tribes practiced Buddhism or Mongolian shamanism alongside their Christianity. Genghis Khan's father, for example, bore the name Yasugi, meaning the number 9, which was the most sacred number to the Tartarians. But Yesu or Yasugi also resembled the name Yeshu or Yeshua, Jesus, and was pronounced almost identically in the Mongolian tongue. The Christian teachings of the Mongolian people are said to have arrived from Thomas the Apostle, or Thomas the Apostle, one of the 12 apostles. Thomas, from Aramaic Thoma, means twin. Thomas the Apostle is also known as Didymus in Greek, also meaning twin. In translations of the Gospel of Thomas, his full name is often given as Judas Thomas, leading some scholars to speculate that Thomas was a twin to Judas. According to James Tabor and other biblical scholars, however, Judas Thomas is a mistranslation, and the name is actually Jude Thomas, as in Jude, the brother of Jesus, as mentioned in the Gospels of Mark. In the book of Thomas the Contender, in the Nag Hammadi library, dating to roughly 200 AD, Thomas is not only known as Jude, brother of Jesus, but the Thomas in the name indicates that Jude is in fact the twin brother of Jesus. Thomas the Apostle in Tartaria is sometimes considered to have inspired the Prester John myth, the mythical Christian Nestorian patriarch who ruled over a massive, secluded Christian kingdom amongst the pagans to the far east, according to later European tradition. The myth of Prester John first gained acclaim in the late 12th century, roughly the time that the Pax Tartarica began. The Tartarians, including Genghis Khan, ordered large-scale construction of permanent stone structures for Christian worship alongside the more commonly known yurts. The Mongolians or Tartarians had various interpretations of the scripture, leading to an affinity for all religions, becoming the basis for the Golden Horde's tolerance. The Tartarians are said to have taken a particular interest in the wandering of the Hebrew tribes, according to Mongolian historian Jack Weatherford, with their conquering of the lands which consisted of the former empire of Khazarica, seemingly setting off the Pax Tartarica. The Tartarians were known to practice Christianity in great detail, with most women of Tartaria either wearing a cross amulet or having a cross tattooed somewhere on their body. Genghis Khan's own sons all married Christian women of the Kharite clan, who held great influence in their courts. Genghis Khan's grandson, Khan Monk, ruled the kingdom with direct Nestorian Christian influence. Dokaz Katan was the Nestorian wife of Haluga Khan and mother of Abaka Khan, who himself would go on to marry Maria, daughter of the Byzantine Emperor Michael VIII. Kit Buka was one of the most famous Christian Tartarians, leading and winning battles in Cairo, Persia, Baghdad, and Damascus. Historical accounts, quoting from the writings of the medieval historian Templar of Tyre, would often describe 3 Christian rulers, Hethum of Armenia, Boheman of Antioch, and Kit Buka, entering the city of Damascus together and gaining triumph. The Patriarch of Babylon, or Patriarch of the East, the head bishop of the Church of the East, was a Tartarian Nestorian for over 35 years during the Pax Tartarica, Yabala III, also known as Rabban Marcos. Beijing, now China's capital, was known as Khan Balik during the Pax Tartarica, only indicating the architectural ability and prowess of the Golden Horde, who primarily constructed the Forbidden City and the surrounding walls, which still make up Beijing today. Khan Balik, as it was known, quickly became a center for Christian beliefs, culminating in Rabban Bar Salma pilgrimaging from Beijing to Rome in an attempt to unify those two world powers. The Pax Tartarica describes the overarching stabilizing effect the Tartarian Empire had on the greater parts of the known world from the years of roughly 1200 ending about 125 years later in roughly 1325. The term is used to describe the eased communication and commerce the unified administration helped to create and the period of relative peace that followed the Tartarians. Genghis Khan's conquest united the eastern and western worlds, with much of the western world struggling to arise or unify after the Dark Ages. The Silk Road came entirely under the control of Tartaria. It was commonly said that, quote, a maiden bearing a nugget of gold on her head could wander safely throughout the entire realm, end quote. During the Pax Tartarica, Genghis Khan incorporated strategies which had helped the earlier Pax Khazarica to thrive. The Golden Horde would not subjugate the people it conquered, but instead incorporate their teachings, their beliefs, their inventions, and their structures directly into the larger Golden Horde. To quell distrust amongst his new subjects, Genghis Khan restructured his army often. Where nearly every kingdom previously had separated its peoples by linguistic and cultural differences, Genghis removed these traditional divisions, which often led to infighting and war, and instead ordered his army, and indeed his kingdom, to be structured in arbands. Arbands were groups of 10 military leaders from 10 different backgrounds, ordered to be loyal only to each other, regardless of ethnic origin. This breakdown of societal norms created a vast amalgamation of equal and invigorated people who all had a voice within the Golden Horde. 10 arbands made a company of 100. 10 companies made a battalion of 1,000. 10 battalions, an army of 10,000. 10,000 being the exact number of soldiers that the earlier Khazarian peace put into place. This interconnecting of all the tribes and the forced intermingling made the Golden Horde nearly impervious to outside persuasion or influence. Speaking of the Pax Tartarica, or the Khazarian peace, Genghis Khan officially incorporated what remained of the Khazars along with the entirety of the Caspian or Khazarian Sea landscape into the Golden Horde in roughly 1221. The next 14 years were spent, it seems, as Genghis and the Golden Horde incorporated the Khazarian army's ideals into the Horde, leading to similar tactics being used by the Golden Horde that were used by the Khazarians many years earlier. By 1235, the Golden Horde had then annexed Korea. 2 years later, most of Kievan Rus had been captured. By 1241, Tartaria had incorporated Poland and Hungary. By 1252, the Golden Horde began its conquest of Song China, one of its longest campaigns, which it finally captured in 1276. In 1258, the Horde had captured Baghdad and many parts of the Middle East. Each new victory gave the Tartarians the chance to incorporate new people, especially foreign engineers and laborers, into their society. Each new conquest also acquired new trade routes and the opportunity to control taxation and tribute. Thus, through territorial expansion, the Tartarian nation not only became an empire, but also became more technologically and economically advanced. At its peak, Tartaria stretched from Busan, South Korea in the east, to Budapest, Hungary in the west, to Lithuania in the north, the whole way to Vietnam in the south. However, the trade network comprised all parts of the known world. As a result, the trade routes used by merchants became safe for travel, exclusively controlled and guarded by Tartarian interests, resulting in an overall growth and expansion of trade from China in the east to Britain in the west, the whole way to northern Africa in the south. Through trade alone, the Pax Tartarica affected nearly every kingdom or country of Eurasia. According to historians like Thomas T. Olson, this was the most significant period in all of history of new and never before seen commodities and technologies being traded and reaching new parts of the world, including but not limited to the fields of economy, banking, finance, military, medicine, agriculture, farming, cuisine, astronomy, printing, geography, and history or record keeping. Before the rise of the Tartarian Empire, the Old World consisted entirely of isolated imperial trade systems, usually categorized by 7 unique systems or trade routes, which were all united for the first time in history under the Tartarians. Previously, 3 of these routes had historically been united by the Khazarian Empire. However, never before had all 7 trade systems been interconnected, that is, until the Pax Tartarica. The Tartarian Empire amalgamated the once isolated civilizations into a new continental system and re-established the Silk Road as a dominant method of transportation. The unification of Eurasia under the Tartarians greatly diminished the number of competing tribute gatherers throughout the trade network and assured greater safety and security in the travel. During the Pax Tartarica, European merchants like Marco Polo made their way from Europe to China on the well-maintained and well-traveled roads that linked the world and had been re-established, some would say dug out, by the Tartarians. On the Silk Road, caravans with Chinese silk, pepper, ginger, cinnamon, and nutmeg came to the west from the Spice Islands via the transcontinental trade route. Eastern diets were introduced to Europeans as well. Indian tools, cotton, pearls, and precious stones were sold to Europe, as well as weapons, carpets, and leather goods from Iran. Gunpowder was introduced to Europe from China, forever changing the way war would occur. In the opposite direction, Europeans sent silver, fine cloth, horses, linen, and other goods to the Near and Far East. Increasing trade and commerce meant that the respective nations and societies also increased their exposure to new goods and markets, thus increasing the GDP of every nation that was involved. Many of the cities participating in the 13th century Tartarian world trade system grew rapidly in size. Along with tangible goods, people, techniques, information, and ideas moved lucidly across the Eurasian landmass for the first time in history. The Tartarians introduced wood paper making to Europe from the Far East. This, along with the invention of gunpowder, would seriously change the course of history. What would it take to unify world cultures? What would it take to introduce new ideas and new standards for rewriting history? Essentially, the production of books would make that possible, beginning with the introduction of papermaking. Extrapolating on this further, with the arrival of readily available writing materials came the arrival of bookmaking itself, as well as bookkeeping in the context of bills of exchange, deposit banking, and insurance, which were all introduced to Europe from Tartaria during the Pax Tartarica. Bills of exchange, for example, are the precursors to modern banking, the system said to be first made famous or infamous during the Pax Khazarica. Paper money and bills of sale made it significantly easier to travel long distances because a traveler would not be burdened by the weight of metal coins. On the flip side, this allowed the Golden Horde, the Tartarians, to essentially take the most valuable precious metals and gems from every kingdom they conquered and replace what they took with simple paper. This worked simply because the Tartarian peace. It worked because the Tartarians had a system, a plan, an idea for ruling a society and controlling it, operating it, and maintaining it while giving the illusion of freedom. It is from these ancient Tartarian ideals, it seems, that our current societal structure took root. Was the Pax Tartarica, for all the seldom discussed yet thoroughly important glory it brought to the world, actually something more nefarious? Methods of papermaking and printing made their way from China to Europe, rudimentary banking systems were established, and money changing and credit extension were common, resulting in large amounts of merchant wealth. Who were the merchants amongst the Golden Horde? A system of weights and measures was also standardized. Again, we see here that the entirety of the society seems to be based solely on the importance of trade. To make the voyage on the trade routes less harrowing, the Mongols, or the Tartarians, went as far as to plant trees along the road to shade the merchants and the travelers in the summer months and provide them with a path. Stone pillars were also used to mark the roads where trees could not be grown. The Tartarians developed the concept of liability in relation to investments and loans in a partnership. Tartarian elites formed trade partnerships with merchants from Central and Western Asia and Europe, including the world's most famous cartographers and Marco Polo himself. This legal system of Tartarian trade was known as the Yasa. Harsh penalties, including a retribution of 9 times the original value of stolen goods, helped deter theft on the Tartarian roads. The Tartarians developed one of the first police forces as well, paid for by the taxes that they levied on all trade goods. Religious leaders were exempt from taxation, as were doctors, lawyers, undertakers, teachers, and scholars, further displaying just how much of our current society seemed to arise from the Pax Tartarica. We're told the first postal system was established under the Tartarians, the first system of communication that connected the Far East and the West directly. Relay stations were set up every 25 to 30 miles, in which messages would travel by horse from one station to the next, where the messenger could exchange horses and continue onward. He could feed the horse or himself and continue onward, or he could relay the message to the next rider who would continue onward with the message. This postal system precursor was known as the Yam. The Yam stretched across Tartarian territory from Eastern Europe to the Pacific Ocean. The routes were well organized, well funded, maintained, and administrated by the Tartarians. This highly sophisticated system of communication and travel made it relatively easy to send important messages and travel long distances in relatively short amounts of time. As a result of the relatively lucid communication and ease of movement, the Tartarians were able to govern their vast empire effectively, thereby ensuring political and economic stability. One thing we must keep in mind is the sheer amount of different inventions, technologies, and advancements which occurred and were being utilized and expanded upon during the Pax Tartarica. Imagine a world in which simple things like paper or books or gunpowder, or even more nefarious things like money or banking systems. Imagine if these things had never reached Europe when they did. Sure, we can argue that eventually, without the Golden Horde, these inventions, these discoveries would have made their way to all parts of the known world. Yes, we can argue that. But imagine, if you will, the year 1200. Imagine trying to venture out from your own farm, from your own kingdom, into another that was ruled by another group who spoke a different language, who had a different set of ideals, who did not agree with your lifestyle. The sheer amount of dangerous things you could incur, mixed with the uncertainty of the time, would primarily lead people to stay within their own kingdoms, looking to covet their technology and their knowledge, not share it. Many of our oldest instances of these inventions come in times of need, in times of war, in times of fear. What would make a country want to share something which it needs to keep to have the upper hand on its competitors? The answer is peace. Peace took away the need for these inventions. The Pax Tartarica made it safe for almost anyone to travel almost anywhere in Europe, the Middle East, or Asia without ever having to fear anything. The Tartarians guarded the routes. They built roads. They lined the roads with trees, markers, guiding fires. They encouraged the trade. They engaged in the trade. They enacted the harshest penalties imaginable on those who would look to hurt or disrupt the trade, to disrupt the peace. Many seem to think the Tartarians or the Mongolians, this Golden Horde, were some sort of nomadic, traveling tribe of warriors akin to Game of Thrones and the Dothraki. Realistically, the Tartarians are much closer related to the Khazarians and even the Romans, having facilitated their own pax or great peace from the teachings of these two earlier lost utopias. The Golden Horde was highly educated, sophisticated, with easily the most advanced knowledge amalgamated between thousands of smaller kingdoms. This was the peak of the world, the peak of the old world. To know the true prowess, the true history of any one kingdom in history would be vexing, but imagine the Tartarians, who quite literally brought thousands of new kingdoms and new technologies to thousands of people across thousands of miles of landscape. Before the Tartarians opened this door, we have technology that was being hoarded and being hidden, the same way as history itself is being hoarded and hidden today. That is, until the Golden Horde, seemingly the embodiment of manifest destiny, comes along to the limelight with the ideals that essentially all men are created equal, all men have equal rights to religion, and all men deserve access to all knowledge. It's these principles which arose from the Golden Horde, from Tartaria, that led me to believe not only did the Golden Horde shift humanity into a new age, but they did so under the guise, under the auspices of doing the right thing and doing it for God. That's what absolutely fascinates me about this narrative. When we look at Tartary or Tartaria, the Golden Horde, at the Pax Tartarica or the Peace of Tartary, we find so many similarities to the biblical millennial reign, and that's why I find myself so compelled over and over again to keep diving into this work and sharing it with you. The world today is a scary place, that's for sure, but imagine 1,000 years ago when you quite literally would be lucky to live to 40. To leave your home was a risk to your life, and to have an education was to be entrenched in a belief system that tells you to ignore your impulses. Then we enter the Golden Horde. They lifted the veil for many people. What makes us who we are? What can we find beyond the great void? What is beyond the four corners of the earth? And is it our right to conquer these lands under the guise of freeing the minds and freeing the people? It's a question we see repeatedly in mainstream narratives today, movies and fiction, but it's a core question at the basis of every human. The Golden Horde truly found a balance between ancient shamanism, Buddhism, Zoroastrianism, aligning their teachings of the ancient with those of the Abrahamic. The downfall of the Tartarians is often labeled as the fragmenting of the Golden Horde near the end of the 13th century when the conquest time had ceased. However, I believe the conquest of the world by the Golden Horde, and indeed the overarching narrative itself, were halted by something which is attested to, yet not thoroughly given credit in any of the narratives that I've read. That is a mixture of the Little Ice Age, beginning in the early 14th century, and the subsequent onset of the Black Plague, which ravaged the known world. The current narrative will tell us that the Black Plague played a role without first mentioning that the plague itself, a reoccurring event throughout time, appears to go hand in hand, as if triggered by the onset of this Little Ice Age or these Little Ice Age events. Temperatures then dropped significantly in increments over the course of a few hundred years, and during this time, roughly the 13th, 14th, 15th, and 16th centuries, the landscape of the world dramatically shifted as well, with climates becoming increasingly volatile. The weather appears to have triggered otherworldly events which would go on to devastate much of the Eurasian plain. While we can fast forward and look at the fall of Constantinople as the end of medieval times, I believe the true tragedy, the true end to something even greater, was the menacing demise of Tartaria, which appeared to befell them as an act of God or an act of nature. According to the current narrative, the fall of Tartaria or the Golden Horde, just like the fall of Khazaria, was facilitated by Kievan Rus. Just like in the fall of Khazaria, the ruling class in Tartary was known as the White Horde, and they had friendly relations with the Great Khan. Just as in the fall of Khazaria, we're told the majority of the Tartarians converted to Islam. The remaining Tartarians quite literally lost their faith. As we mentioned earlier, what makes the Pax Tartarica so amazing is just how much was achieved in such a short period of time. Faith in safe travel, faith in following your calling, faith in exploration, faith in discovery. This was all something the world had never truly felt before, a faith to finding out the truth, which makes it even more discouraging to hear that after the fragmentation of the Golden Horde, after the bubonic plague, and after the Little Ice Age begins, we have a majority of the Tartarians who flee eastward to China, looking to distance themselves from the trade and the contact with other nations. Here, the Tartarians are isolated. Still, many remain within the Tartarian land as the Chinese Empire grows. At this time, China then prohibits foreigners, foreign trade, and languages other than Chinese, a policy it implements for the next 300 plus years. Confucianism and Taoism are reinstated as the national religion, and the Chinese experience a cultural stagnation. By 1400, the majority of Tartary has been incorporated into other major countries and kingdoms which make up the greater parts of Eurasia today. These kingdoms jockey for control of the trade routes, but alas, nothing again ever reached the heights at which the Tartarian Empire once appeared. The Pax Tartarica quite literally changed everything in the world, from politics to how we handle money to recording our history. Instead of on difficult scrolls, we have wood paper and bookmaking. We have fireworks and gunpowder. We have banking and insurance. We have the establishment of these aspects of life, and they are still in play today, over 700 years later, ideally showing us that the society that we have today is one that is based off of and deeply rooted in Tartarian tradition, a tradition which quite literally keeps us in our place and meant to not question things while thinking that we have freedom. Was the Pax Tartarica a positive thing? Was it nefarious? Most likely, the answer is yes to both. Society back then, just like society today, was formed around the people. Where there could be a Golden Horde with ideas of educating the masses and allowing the world to be united, we also have the same Golden Horde who instituted paper money and bank lending, essentially a system for systematically controlling the goods, the gold, the silver, and in return, the people. Did the Golden Horde really fall? Or can we still see the Golden Horde, the Tartarians, today in the architecture, in the banking systems, and in the culture that we're subjugated to? Let me know in the comments down below. This was probably my most intricate video to date. I know I say that all the time, but every video I'm trying to do better than my last. So please, if you enjoyed this, hit the thumbs up. If you learned something, please subscribe to the channel. And if you'd like, please donate to the channel here. I make all this content by myself, and I appreciate every single one of you for being here. I want to hear what you think about the Tartarian hypothesis, the Pax Tartarica down below, and I look forward to our discussion. I'll see you on the next video. Thanks for being here, y'all. Cheers.